I never expected to fall in love again at 42. Hell, I didn't think I deserved to. But there's something about grief that either closes you off completely or cracks you open in ways you never imagined possible. For me, it took 3 years, a stubborn fence line and a rancher with calloused hands and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how a woman I never met gave me permission to love her husband. I moved to Montana after the divorce, needing space from the city, from memories, from the person I'd been pretending to be for 15 years. I bought 10 acres of nothing special, just grassland and sky and silence. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts, whether you want to or not. My nearest neighbour was a cattle ranch about a mile down the road. I'd see the dust from trucks sometimes, hear the occasional low of cattle carried on the wind, but I kept to myself those first few months. I was healing, or at least I was trying to figure out what healing was supposed to look like. It was late April when I met James. I was attempting to repair a section of fence that separated my property from his grazing land, making an absolute mess of it if I'm being honest. I'd watched 3 YouTube videos and thought I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was wrestling with a fence post that refused to go straight when I heard the rumble of a truck engine. I looked up, squinting against the afternoon sun, and there he was. He climbed out of a dusty Ford, tall and lean, wearing a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a baseball cap shadowing his face. When he got closer, I could see he was probably in his late 40s, with silver threading through dark hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, even though he wasn't smiling then. He was just watching me with this patient, amused expression. "Oh, you're gonna break that post before you get it in the ground," he said, his voice low and warm with a hint of gravel in it. I straightened up, embarrassed, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Yeah, well, I'm learning as I go." "I can see that." He stepped closer, examining my work. "James Holloway. I run the cattle operation next door." "Marcus Chen." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palm rough with work. "Sorry if I'm making a mess of the property line." "Nah, you're fine. But if you want, I could show you a better way to set those posts, save you some frustration." I should have said no. I should have insisted I could figure it out myself. But there was something about the way he offered. No judgment, just genuine helpfulness that made me nod. I'd appreciate that. He spent the next 2 hours teaching me how to properly set fence posts. He was patient, explaining each step, showing me the technique with his own hands before letting me try. We didn't talk much beyond the work, but the silence between us felt comfortable, natural. When we finished, the fence line looked actually professional, and my hands were covered in blisters despite the gloves. "Come by the house," James said, as we packed up the tools. "Least I can do is offer you a beer after all that work." I hesitated. I'd come to Montana for solitude, for space to figure myself out. But I was also desperately lonely, in ways I hadn't admitted to myself. "Sure," I heard myself say, "that'd be nice." His ranch house was a sprawling single-story structure with a wraparound porch and flower beds that had been meticulously maintained. Inside it was clean but lived in, with worn leather furniture and photographs covering nearly every surface. I couldn't help but notice they were all of the same woman. Dark hair, bright smile, often standing next to James with his arm around her shoulders. In some photos there were 2 kids, a boy and a girl at various ages. James caught me looking as he handed me a beer. "My wife Sarah," he said quietly. "She passed 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, like they always do. "Thank you." He settled into an armchair across from me, his eyes distant for a moment. "Kids are grown now. Daniel's in Seattle, Emma's in college in Bozeman, so it's just me and about 200 head of cattle these days." We talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than I expected. He told me about the ranch, about growing up in Montana, about the rhythms of raising cattle. I told him about my life in Seattle, about the tech job I'd left behind, about needing a change. I didn't mention the divorce, didn't mention that the change I needed was finally admitting to myself who I really was. Some truth still felt too raw to speak out loud. Over the next few months, James and I fell into an easy friendship. He'd stop by when he saw me working outside, offering advice or just company. I'd drive down to his place for dinner sometimes, and we'd sit on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He taught me about the land, about reading weather patterns and understanding the seasons. I helped him with projects around the ranch, learning skills I never thought I'd need. But there was something else growing between us, something neither of us acknowledged. It was in the way his hand would linger on my shoulder when he was showing me something, the way our conversation stretched longer and longer into the evening, the way I found myself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to seeing him again. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. I'd just come out to myself a year ago, had just ended a marriage because I couldn't keep living a lie. The last thing I needed was to develop feelings for a straight widower who was still clearly in love with his late wife. Every surface of his house was a shrine to Sarah. He spoke about her often, with a tenderness that made my chest ache. It was late July when everything shifted. We were moving cattle to a different pasture, and I was helping despite having no idea what I was doing. James found it endlessly entertaining, watching me try to anticipate where a cow would go, always guessing wrong. We were both dusty and exhausted when we finally got the last of them through the gate. "You're terrible at this," James said. But he was laughing, really laughing, in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'm a tech guy, not a cowboy," I protested, grinning despite myself. "Could have fooled me. You're starting to look the part at least." He reached out and brushed some dust off my shoulder, and the gesture was so casual, so intimate that I froze. Our eyes met and something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Possibility. His hand was still on my shoulder, and neither of us moved. The moment stretched out, heavy with things unsaid, and then his horse shifted and the spell broke. James dropped his hand, cleared his throat, and suggested we head back to the house. That night, sitting on his porch with beers going warm in our hands, James was quieter than usual. The silence felt different, charged somehow. Finally he spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" My heart started hammering. "Sure. Why did you really move out here? A guy like you, successful career, you just walk away from all that?" I took a long drink of beer, buying time. I needed to figure some things out about myself. What kind of things? This was it. The moment where I could keep hiding or I could be honest. I thought about all those years in Seattle pretending to be someone I wasn't. I thought about the relief I'd felt moving here, the freedom of starting over, and I thought about James, about how safe I felt with him, how alive. I spent 15 years married to a woman I cared about but couldn't love the way she deserved, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Because I'm gay, James, and I didn't want to admit that to myself, let alone anyone else. So I moved out here to figure out how to actually live as who I am. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see disgust or pity or discomfort. But then he spoke, his voice soft. That must have taken a lot of courage, leaving everything behind like that. I finally looked at him. His expression was thoughtful, open, not what I'd feared. Or cowardice, depending on how you look at it. "No," he said firmly. "Courage. Trust me on that." Something in his tone made me study his face more carefully. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a nervousness that mirrored my own. "James?" He set his beer down, rubbed his hands on his jeans. "Sarah and I had a good marriage. I loved her, and she loved me. We built a life together, raised 2 amazing kids. But there were things about myself I never told her, things I barely admitted to myself. After she died, after the grief settled into something I could live with, I started thinking about those things more, about roads not taken, about parts of myself I'd locked away." My breath caught. "What kind of things?" He met my eyes then, and I saw fear and hope warring in his expression. "I've been attracted to men my whole life, Marcus. I chose not to act on it, chose a different path, and I don't regret my life with Sarah, not for a second. But lately with you, I've been feeling things I thought I'd buried for good. The world seemed to tilt. With me? Yeah," he laughed, but it was shaky. "With you, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if I should do anything with it. Sarah's only been gone 3 years. The kids are still processing, and I'm 48 years old, never been with a man, don't even know if I—" "James," I interrupted his spiral, my own heart racing. "I'm feeling things too, have been for weeks now. I just thought you were straight, thought I was setting myself up for heartbreak." He looked at me like I'd handed him something precious and fragile. "Really? Really?" We sat there in the growing darkness, the weight of our confessions hanging between us. Finally, James reached over and took my hand. His palm was warm and rough, familiar from months of working alongside him. We didn't kiss that night. We just sat holding hands on his porch, watching the stars come out, both of us terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The next few weeks were careful, tentative. We were like teenagers, figuring out how to be together, what this thing between us was. Our first kiss happened 3 weeks later, in his barn of all places. We'd been stacking hay, and I'd made some joke that made him laugh, and suddenly he was cupping my face and kissing me. It was gentle, questioning, and when I kissed him back I felt something in my chest unlock that I hadn't known was closed. But as we grew closer, I became increasingly aware of Sarah's presence in James's life. Her photos everywhere, her garden that he still tended, the way he'd mention her in conversation. Sarah always said, or Sarah used to. I understood grief, understood that you don't stop loving someone because they're gone. But I started wondering if there was room for me in a house still so full of her memory. It came to a head one evening in September. We were cooking dinner together, moving around each other in the kitchen with the ease of practice, when James mentioned that Sarah's birthday was coming up. "I always visit her grave that day," he said. "Bring flowers, spend some time there. I was thinking maybe this year you could come with me, if you're comfortable with that." I froze in the middle of chopping vegetables. "James, I don't know if that's a good idea." He turned from the stove, surprised. "Why not?" "Because—" I struggled to find the right words. "Because I'm trying to figure out where I fit in your life, and everywhere I look I see her. I'm not trying to erase her memory or ask you to love her less, but I need to know if there's actually space for me here, or if I'm always going to be living in her shadow." James's face fell. He turned off the burner and came over to me, taking the knife from my hand. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were feeling that way." "How could you not? Her pictures are everywhere. You talk about her constantly, and I get it, I do. She was your wife, the mother of your children. But I need to know if you're ready for this, for us, or if you're just lonely and I'm convenient." "You're not convenient," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the first person since Sarah died who's made me feel alive again, who's made me want to take a risk on something new. But you're right. I haven't been fair to you. I've been trying to hold on to her while reaching for you, and that's not fair to either of you." We talked for hours that night, really talked, about grief and guilt, about moving forward while honouring the past, about what we both needed from this relationship. It was hard and messy and necessary. 2 weeks later, James asked me to come over. He'd been distant since our conversation, and I'd given him space, terrified that I'd pushed too hard, that he'd decided Sarah's memory was more important than a future with me. When I arrived, he led me to the living room. I noticed immediately that something was different. The photos of Sarah were still there, but they'd been consolidated to one wall, a beautiful gallery of her life. The rest of the room felt more open, less like a museum. "I've been doing some thinking," James said, "and some cleaning. This house has been frozen in time for 3 years, like a shrine. That's not what Sarah would have wanted. She was all about living fully, embracing life." He took my hand. "There's something I need to show you." He led me to his bedroom, another room I'd never been in. From a drawer in his nightstand he pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. Sarah wrote letters before she died, one for each of the kids, one for me. I read mine right after the funeral and then never looked at it again. But after our conversation, I went back to it. "There's a part I want you to hear." His hand shook slightly as he unfolded the letter. He cleared his throat and began to read. "James, my love, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll be facing a future we didn't plan for. I know you, and I know you're probably thinking you'll never love anyone else, that what we had was once in a lifetime, and it was. But that doesn't mean it was your only chance at love. I want you to live, really live, after I'm gone. I want you to find joy again, to let someone new into your heart. Don't make a museum of our life together. Honour it by continuing to live yours. And James, I know there are parts of yourself you've kept locked away, even from me. I saw them, even if we never talked about them. Please don't waste the time you have left hiding who you are. Be brave, be happy, be loved. You have my blessing, always." By the time he finished reading, we were both crying. James set the letter down carefully and pulled me into his arms. "I've been carrying so much guilt," he whispered against my hair. "Guilt about moving on, guilt about being with a man, guilt about being happy again. But she knew, Marcus. Somehow she knew, and she gave me permission. She sounds like she was an incredible person, I said. She was, and I think she would have liked you. You both have this way of seeing right through my bullshit and calling me on it. I laughed despite my tears. That's high praise. He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. I love you, Marcus. I should have said it before now, but I was scared. Scared of dishonouring Sarah's memory. Scared of what it meant, scared of screwing this up. But I'm done being scared. I love you, and I want a future with you. I love you too, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I have for months. We kissed then, deep and certain, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't competing with a ghost. Sarah's love for James was big enough to want his happiness, even if it looks different than what they'd had. That kind of love didn't diminish what James and I were building. If anything, it made it more precious. A month later, on a crisp October morning, James took me back to the fence line where we'd first met. The posts we'd set together were still standing strong, weathered but solid. He'd been quiet all morning, nervous in a way that made me nervous. "What's going on?" I finally asked. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart stopped. "Marcus, 6 months ago, you moved in next door and accidentally stumbled into my life. You've made me laugh again, made me feel again, made me brave enough to live as my full self for the first time in my life. Sarah's letter gave me permission to love again, but you gave me a reason to." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band. "This isn't Sarah's ring. This is new, just for us. I want to build a life with you, Marcus. I want to wake up next to you and work alongside you and grow old with you. Will you marry me?" I was crying again, but this time from pure joy. Yes. God. Yes. He slipped the ring on my finger and we stood there holding each other as the Montana wind whipped around us, both of us finally, fully home. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony on the ranch with James's kids standing beside us. Emma gave a toast about how her mum always wanted her dad to be happy, and how she could see that he finally was. Daniel welcomed me to the family with a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. We kept one photo of Sarah on the mantel, her smile seeming to bless the life we were building. I learned that love isn't a finite resource. James's love for Sarah didn't diminish his love for me. If anything, having loved her so deeply taught him how to love me better. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be happy, even when you thought that chance had passed you by. Every morning, I wake up next to the rancher down the road, in the house we've made ours together, and I think about the journey that brought us here. The divorce, the move, the fence line, the careful unfolding of two hearts learning to trust again. And I think about Sarah, the woman I never met, whose final gift to her husband was the freedom to love again. That's the thing about real love. It's generous enough to want happiness for the people it touches, even beyond death, even in forms we never expected. Sarah loved James enough to want him to live fully, and now so do I.